Welcome to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption, foster care, and kinship care. I'm Tracy Whitney, your host for today's conversation about safe families, what the program is, who it serves, and how listeners can get involved in the work of preserving and protecting families in your region. Our guest today is Dr. David Anderson. He is a psychologist and the founder and executive director of Safe Families for Children. He also serves as the executive director of Lydia Home Association in Chicago and has been recognized as a social entrepreneur and a social movement leader. So welcome, Dr. Anderson. We're so glad that you joined us today, and we're looking forward to hearing all about safe families.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. Let's dive in. So for somebody who's new to Safe Families for Children, can you tell us what it is?
So I would say we create extended families for those who don't have it. And what we do is we recruit volunteers who host children, support parents, all the things that if I, am parenting, if I need to go to hospital, I'd ask my relatives, can you take my kids for a while I get back on my feet? And that's what we've tried to create.
That's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of drew you to create this organization.
So my dad was a bricklayer and I was going to be a bricklayer. And all of a sudden he said, Dave, whatever you do, don't be a bricklayer. But I learned a lot while working for him on the job. And he would hire all these men who had just gotten out of prison. And finally I said, Dad, why in the world do you hire these guys who just got out of prison? There's plenty of people who could be bricklayers. And he said to me, if I don't help them, who will?
Oh.
And that was just something that became part of my DNA when I was very young. This idea that as a society, we have a responsibility to help those that need help. And so I was involved in ministry. I was a pastor and I was a missionary overseas in Micronesia and things like that. But then when I returned, I decided to become a psychologist. And my focus really was in the area of foster care, child abuse prevention, and things like that. And I became a psychologist with the initial focus was assessing children who have been horribly harmed to determine what the psychological impact of their harm had been, and then testifying on their behalf. So I was very moved by, all that happens to kids that have been traumatized before they get into foster care and felt like, man, I wish I could do something about it. So that's really the beginning of how I started to think about safe families.
What a great story, and so many parallels between laying bricks and creating good foundations for a house and bricks laying foundation for children. I love that.
Very true. Yes.
That's great. So tell us about the families that you serve and what kinds of situations bring them to Safe Families for Children.
Well, the one that really got us started, I was working at Mount Sinai Hospital doing evaluations of children. They would come for 5 days, and there was a little girl who came, and she was 5, and she happened to be the same age as my daughter. And her arm was broken, her retina was detached, and her brain was beginning to swell. And so my job was to determine what happened to her. And she didn't really care to talk about it. But when I met the mom said, I grew up in foster care. I, aged out. My foster parents no longer wanted to have anything to do with me because they weren't getting paid anymore. My parents' rights were terminated. I ended up becoming pregnant and I'm trying to raise a child with no family support in my life. I was working. If I were to miss one more day of work, I would have lost my job. And so I asked my ex-boyfriend if he could care for my daughter while I went to work. And then this is what happened. She said, I didn't know he went back to drugs, and this is what happened to my daughter. She ended up losing custody of her child, partly because of me. But I started the thing, and I'm kind of haunted by it, because her only mistake is that she had no one else to call when things were going bad. And that's really because the girl was my daughter's age, and it just hit me hard. I started to think about, she really didn't do anything wrong technically. It's just that she had no resources to help her out at a critical time. And as a psychologist, I was working in child welfare and foster care, and I realized that The majority of families that go into the system are because of that. They don't really have anyone to call, bad things happen, lose a job, whatever, and then they don't have the resources to reach out for help. And that's when I began to think about, can we create a movement of people who are willing to come alongside someone and be like extended family to someone else who doesn't have anyone to reach out to?
So when you say resources, tell us what you mean when a family doesn't have resources.
Well, I think, I mean, we served, someone said 86,000 families. There's stories of families that are in difficult situations. So for us, would say families, it could be almost anything, right? Any
Hmm.
trouble that someone has. But typical ones are really people that have lost their housing, not because of anything they did, but maybe their landlord didn't pay, their mortgage or whatever, and end up being in the car, or they don't have anyone to stay with, or many living in a car, right? And they end up taking their kids with them. And they realize that's not really a great thing, right? To have your kids sleep in a car with you. But they didn't have anything else to do. So those are situations where people don't have places to live, they don't have work. Many of them are like have medical issues and need to go to hospital, and there's no one to take care of their kids. Some of them people struggle with mental health issues and need to get some treatment, but they need someone to watch out, watch their kid. So it's really almost any reason you could think of.
So why is a program like Safe Families especially important right now?
Well, I'm sure most of you, I'm sure you're aware that the Surgeon General identified social isolation as a leading social health problem, community
Hmm.
health problem in the United States. And actually, that 40% of parents are struggling with isolation, not having enough resources or support to help them be what their kids need them to be.
Right.
And so now is really probably some of the most urgent times when we as a society need to mobilize and come alongside families in our communities that are struggling and that need our help. And for us with Safe Families, we help them in really any way a volunteer can do it, whether it's some take in kids and be a host family for them, others are we call them family friends, but just people that come alongside and are a good listening ear and want to support families and help them process decisions and things like that. To resource friends, people who have a mattress or baby clothes or whatever. We what we say is there's a role for anyone to serve at whatever capacity they're able and willing to do it.
So you mentioned the social isolation. I'm thinking several generations ago, our grandparents, for example, grew up in little enclaves where
Yes.
relatives didn't move that far away. They were often on the same block, or like in my family's situation, I can think of my mom's side of the family where all of her relatives lived within the same few blocks of this
Yes.
section of their city. And so if they needed childcare, they had an aunt or an uncle or a cousin that could help. If they needed somebody to run to the grocery store for them while the baby was napping, they had help with that. They had lots of physical resources at their disposal. And certainly that has changed with how transient our nation has become. People moving away for jobs that nobody thought to do that back then. So it's
Yes.
interesting, how some of the positive changes across culture have also created new problems.
And I think, communities are different. I
Yeah.
remember we used to have front porches and people would hang out on the front porch and wave to each other and connect and things
Yeah.
like that. And, there are communities where people don't even know their neighbors
Right.
and don't have those relationships. And I think it has created significant difficulty. Obviously, clearly with our older population is feeling isolated as well, but it really seems to be hitting the families really hard. And the difficulty is that I don't believe, and I'm a psychologist, I'm a father, I'm an adopted parent, I'm a foster parent, I don't believe that we're created to do it all ourselves. And there are so many times, even when, our kids were young, we would call my sister, oh, my kid won't go to sleep. Do you have any suggestions? Or,
Yeah.
I'm really struggling because, my child won't take a time out and I'm just so frustrated. I don't know what to do. And and people just need time and relationships to really process things. They don't always need to send their child somewhere else, right? It's just feeling like I'm doing this and I feel alone. And we recruit foster parents, and I'm a foster parent. And I remember a child we had, and I just felt so alone, where the child was struggling with, clear real issues related to his trauma and early childhood, maybe even some fetal alcohol syndrome stuff or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And we were just struggling with how do we manage this. One time he
Yeah.
said to my wife, he said, that guy, Dave, he didn't call me, dad or anything. That guy, Dave, he's a bad guy. And I think you should dump him, you know? But it was from his world was men were not good people.
Right.
So he had these thoughts and ideas about who I was that I had the darndest time overcoming. And it was really kind of a isolating time.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any other fathers or dads or other people to talk to about the struggle of wanting to be kicked out of my own home. And I think that's really when I think of safe families, we're really just trying to build connections and support for those who don't have it, and including those who are hosting, and we're trying something new, really bringing safe families to support foster families and grandparents raising grandkids, and with that same network,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because our intent is how do we keep families, whatever the family is, how do we keep them together
Right.
and effective in being what those kids need them to be.
Right. So, what happens to a family when they don't have access to something like Safe Families? What are you seeing for those that are kind of getting lost through the cracks?
Well, I think unfortunately, why I started Safe Families was to help divert and prevent foster care. And
Mhm.
not that, I run foster care, right? And not that it's bad, but it's that, many systems are too overwhelmed and there isn't enough resources. And the idea that I don't believe when foster care was created, it was meant to be that they are responsible for all the trouble children have in the United States, right? They have a role to play, but they can't do everything.
Right.
And so unfortunately, we see families who don't have those relationships, don't have those connections, and then problems build up. Many of them are beyond their control, end up getting a hotline call, and then someone comes in and says, we don't think you're doing what your kids need you to be, so we're gonna remove them from you. And some definitely need to be removed. No doubt about that. I used to do evaluations of children and we're part of helping them be removed. But many, probably people would say 40% of kids who go into foster care now go in because of neglect. That means there's something in their environment that is creating problems, not necessarily poor parenting decisions or things like that. And I think it's those that are our target because the system isn't really designed to solve those neglect problems. So that's where I think we fit in.
There's an overlap then with foster care and Safe Families. How is it different from foster care for those who are considering how to get involved? What makes Safe Families different than saying, "Oh, I want to be a foster parent," which we also
Yeah,
need. We also want families to know that there is a great need for foster families. But
yes,
if
there is.
fostering is not the path for your family, what makes Safe Families different?
Yeah. Well, I think even if we are foster parents and our child we have goes home and we're taking a break and many times a lot of foster parents will jump in and do both, right? Like, oh, I could take a safe family child, or whatever. But a couple things are different. One is We don't pay anybody, right? We have, I don't know, even know how many, 5 or 10,000 host families. Everybody does it for free. Nobody gets paid. So that's a big thing.
Hmm.
Second is it's really short term. Our average stay, I think we've done it 88,000 times, is probably 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
98% of the kids go back to their parents, or maybe grandma's ready now to take them or something like that. So our intent is for the kids to go home. And the other challenge, both the strength and maybe some of the challenge that foster parents have a hard time with, is that if parents place out of their free will, out of their choice. And so they could change their mind at any time. And I remember dealing with some foster parents who were used to, having the state behind them and forcing, can't you force the parent to do this or can't you whatever? And I'm like, no, we can't. We can suggest it, we can advise them to do it. We could say, well, we can't continue unless you do this or whatever. But it's really the parent's choice and the parent's will. And actually, surprisingly, in most situations, in nearly all situations, parents eventually make the right decision and are doing the right thing. And we're not ending the relationship because of, the parent is not doing the right thing and stuff. So those are the big differences of the hosting part of it. The
Hmm.
other thing that's important that we do is even if the child's in hosting, we recruit others to come alongside and be like, we call it a circle of support or a network of people around the parent, because we want to address, that parent should have someone to talk to if they have issues and they need support and maybe they need help in finding work or they need some other things. And so we create a network of people that are willing to come alongside the parent and help them out and provide, for what they need.
So there's mentoring and support and care for the parent who may have chosen to be a participant in the Safe Families program. There's support and care for the child in the Safe Families program. And then you're saying that also those who are doing the hosting, they're getting support and
Yeah.
training and education and care to do the care.
Yes. Yes.
So this voluntary kind of prevention based model is kind of unique and different from what most people who are involved in adoption, foster care, and kinship care are familiar with. Do you see that this voluntary model does aid in prevention of involvement in the system?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple things. One is, 2% of our situations end up going into foster care from the host family home.
Okay.
And in many times, once if foster care is taken, the state will say, can the host families keep the kids and become fictive kin, or is what the term really is, they have a pre-existing relationship. So in some ways, when that needs to happen, it's probably the best scenario because the child already has a relationship with the host family. The mom has a relationship with the host family and the network. And it's really just, I mean, nothing really changes other than the parent doesn't have as many rights as they had before. In some of those situations, it really ends up being very positive. And, sometimes a parent can get back on their feet, and other times the state is saying, will the host family adopt the kids and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So it's very variable on how that would go.
You said only 2% end up
Yeah.
going on to foster care. That's phenomenal. That's family preservation at its best.
Yes, I would say, what's interesting, I've never, I'll probably never do this again, but we decided early on to do a massive randomized control evaluation. And it was shocking because the state of Illinois decided to randomize kids at the point of investigations, which is really unheard of, right? It's like you're randomizing kids to safe families versus business as usual at the point of when you're determining what's happening. And we were shown to be four times more effective than any other model in keeping kids safe, keeping them together with their families, and 6 months to a year later, they're still together because our host families and our volunteers, we have a beginning, but we don't really have any ending, right?
Hmm.
Unless the
Hmm.
parent wants it. There are kids that my wife and I are involved with now that we met them when they were 3 and 5, and then now 18, right? And they still come over on Easter and Christmas and hang out with us. And if their mom's in trouble, we'll take her kids. And that's really the joy of it. It's long-term relationships that make a difference. But the thing that was so interesting is when I first came up with the idea. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we're going to mobilize a massive network of people. In Illinois, they said, first of all, it was illegal. And so the attorney general sent me a cease and desist order. You need to stop safe families, and you're not allowed to do that. And then three other states, their attorney general sent me a cease and desist order. So it was the idea that people just thought, is that really legal? Shouldn't everybody be foster parents? And our point was the parent hasn't done anything wrong. They haven't, we're not doing this against their will. It's like they're asking grandma and grandpa to help them out,
Right.
and parents
Right.
should have rights to determine who's going to help them out if they haven't done anything wrong. And then, so we got over that. We ended up writing 17 laws in 17 states to make safe families legal. And then, interesting, as we started to get going, the head of DCFS pulled me aside and said, Dr. Anderson, I want to talk to you about this. I'm like, okay. I went in and he wasn't really smiling, and so I said, okay, yeah. He said, I want to understand safe family. Told him my idea. And he said to me, Dr. Anderson, the best idea I've ever heard in my entire career. But he wasn't smiling. So I'm
Uh-oh.
like, okay, thank you, I think. And then he
Think.
said, but it'll never, ever work. Don't bother wasting your time. He said, you will be a complete failure. And he didn't know I have a really low self-esteem, and I kind of that's part of the tape that goes through my mind all the time, right? This
Yeah.
you'll be a
Yeah.
failure, this will never work, whatever. And so I said, he wasn't smart. So I said, okay, um, so why won't it work? And he said this. He said, these people are volunteers. Volunteers are only good for putting stamps on letters and things like that. You're asking volunteers to do something we can't even pay people to do. And people are going to do it for free? There will be no way. And I'm like, well, why would I need to pay them? He said, well, if you don't pay them, how do you control them? And I'm like, I don't want to control them, right? I want to identify families, people with shared values that have the same values we have, and then unleash them and do that. And he said, it'll never work. And then he said, I have another problem. He said, okay, what is it? He said, many of these people are of faith. He said, they only protest things, they never do anything proactive. And so I started with this incredible resistance. One is there is no way you could mobilize people to do very dramatic things for strangers, right? These are people they don't even know, they never even met before. And you're going to ask them to take in and care for a child on their own dime and love them as if they were their own kid, and then readily give them back to the parent whenever the parent wants them. I'm like, yep, that's what grandparents do. That's what, and that's what we want
Yeah.
to do. And he said, it'll never ever work. Don't bother wasting, your time. So whenever you come up with an idea, there's always resistance. There's always
Yeah.
people saying it's, they're identifying, oh, did you think of this problem? And I'm like, well, probably not. But that was something that was very dramatic for me and almost derailed, what we were going to do. And then one of the states sent me a cease and desist, and they had me come and talk to them. And I met with a whole room of attorneys for the state, and they said, we understand you're bringing this into our state. We don't want it. We think it's illegal and you need to stop. And then by that time I was not cocky, but I was a little frustrated. And so I said, okay, well, what's illegal about it? And they said, well, this caring thing that people are doing. The idea that they're going to care for another child, they're going to take them into their home, and people just don't do that. So we think that, and they said in the state, and I remember this, and the state is best equipped to help families. I'm like, yeah, but these people haven't done anything. They haven't abused their kid. They haven't done
Yeah.
anything. Well, the state is still best equipped. And then I said to him, I said, well, how illegal is it? Are you just going to like write us a ticket or you're going to whatever? And they said, well, if you continue, we'll probably need to arrest you. And I'm like, okay. Well, I knew I didn't live in that state, so I kind of went back to my state and they didn't have any jurisdiction. But it was this idea that, people had a hard time creating a mindset to think about one is, will this work? Can it really make, and that's why research was so important to us because we wanted to prove that that was the case, that it can work and make a difference in the lives of families.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're challenging the norms,
Yes.
especially if the norms are held by government officials' hands, it can be an uphill battle to reverse the norms or expand the norms. And I love
Yeah.
that you didn't give up and you didn't quit. Listeners, did you happen to notice the fan mail button on your podcast player? It's kind of new, and we're really excited about this way for you to engage with us and to share your thoughts and ideas. So drop us some fan mail. Let us know what you want to learn more about. Let us know what questions you have about how you can strengthen your family. Let us know how we're doing. We can't wait to hear from you. And we're going to go back to the interview now. So when you're recruiting these volunteers, what kind of screening do they have to go through and what kind of training do they get in order to do this caring that is obviously not illegal?
Well, for those who are hosting, we vet them like foster care.
Okay.
So we do a home assessment, we do background checks, we get references, we go into their home and make sure that their home is safe. There's not like medicine sitting out on the table or whatever. I kind of mirrored what people do for foster care because if we call people safe, right? If we say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we have a safe family for you, well, we should do what we can to make sure that's the case. Now, that's not, I didn't create the name to say, oh, we're safe and you're not.
Right.
I came up with the term primarily because if a mom is in trouble, she has no one to help, and she needs her kid to go somewhere, her biggest question is, are these going to be safe people? And so that's why we call it Safe Families. And then training, I was a trainer for one of the foster care models called Foster Pride. And so I really took what was good about Foster Pride and put it together. And that's really how, we've created the model for safe families is the training. And then we support parents. Like if I put a child in your home for on day one, 2 days later, I'm going to go in and say, how you doing? What do you need? Is the child doing okay? Blah, blah, blah. And then we have people check in with people every week for at least the first month or so. So
Okay.
that's kind of how we end up doing that.
So in addition to that screening or vetting and then the training, they're getting weekly support from your organization
Yeah.
that would identify any gaps or resources that the family might need to better support this child. What kind of support are the parents getting when they've voluntarily said, "I need someone to take my child. I'm going through treatment, or I'm going to be in the hospital getting care." What kind of support do those parents get?
Yeah. Well, all of them get a family coach,
Okay.
which isn't like a case, it's like a caseworker, but because we have no authority, we're there to coach them, right? And support them. And just like maybe like an athletic coach is we're there to cheer them on and support them and stuff. Then they get what we call a family friend, one or two family friends, and then that's their circle of support. That
Okay.
these groups of people coming alongside of them. And we set up the task. We're like, okay, you need safe families. What do you want to accomplish while your child isn't with you? And so we set up goals and we're like, oh, you want to get a job? Okay, let's set up how we can go about doing that. And so we're constantly helping them identify and work on accomplishing goals. But really the change agent of safe families is it's relational and it's a long-term relationships, right? It's the idea that like with the family that my wife and I helped when the mom, had young kids and she had to go into drug treatment and now the kids are 18 and 17 and we still see them multiple times a year
Yeah.
that's really in my mind the change agent is really creating these relationships that have a beginning and don't have an end.
Okay. So actually staying with a safe family may only be 4 to 6 weeks,
Yes.
but the relationship goes on as long as both parties are interested in staying in relationship.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
And some of them could be just 3 days, or
Right.
2 days. And, we all know, as an adoptive or foster parent, that sometimes you just need respite. And that when your kids come back to you, you're more energized and have a little bit more patience or whatever it is. And a lot of, families that we help are kind of like that. Is sometimes people just need a break. And that when they get their kids back, they can do a little bit more until they get the next break and
Yeah.
stuff. So.
So can you summarize the roles and the positions of safe family so that people can kind of get a clear list of different ways they might be able to get involved?
Yeah, yeah. So, the one that probably we're best known for is host family,
Hmm.
right? And these are people that are willing to take in a child for however long a parent wants and care for them until that parent is ready to get them back.
Okay.
And so they take in the kid and they begin to develop a relationship with the parent. And host families can choose, they could say, I only want to do 2-day things, or I only want, and we send notes out, by text messages on who needs help and we'll say, hey, it's a 3-year-old that needs, a place. The mom's asking for 4 weeks. And so people can say, or think about, yeah, I can do this for the next 4 weeks, or not even respond and be like, I'm not in a place to help out at this point. So then we have what we call family coaches. And some of these are paid staff and some of these are volunteers, but there are people that are willing to act almost like a case manager that are willing to provide resources to the parent that help them set up goals, that help problem solve things not going well, and they have that role. The third role is what we call family friends, and these are people that are you mentioned like mentors or parents, people that are willing to come alongside parents and be a listening ear to them, be an encourager, maybe make suggestions, things like that. We're in the UK and we've exploded in the UK,
Wow.
exploded in the UK. We're in 18 countries now. And
That's
they said
awesome.
half of their volunteers are 65 and older. And these are people that are just like, I have time on my hand. I've already parented my own kids. I made my own mistakes on my own kids. And so I'm in a little bit better place. And so it's such I think, an untapped resource.
Yeah.
Those that are, older and retired, such an untapped resource around family friendly. They might not want to take a 2-year-old into their home, but they could do that. And then we have what we call resource friends. These are people that either have things, I have extra clothes or whatever, or can get things because we want to meet tangible needs of families as well.
So you mentioned you're in 18 countries. Are you in every state in the United States?
We're in 35 states.
35 of the
Yeah.
50.
Yeah. We
Okay.
have about 120, we call them chapters, but locations.
Okay. Okay. So let's put a face to this if we can. Can you share with us a story that kind of captures the impact of safe families?
There's so many. Well, I mean, the one that I referred to earlier, we met a mom who had to go into drug treatment, and DCFS said to her, you know, if we don't find a place for your kids to go in an hour, we're going to have to take custody of them. So,
Mm.
so the mom heard about us, called. I ran myself. I ran to the drug treatment center and picked up her kids and took them in, and we cared for them. This was longer, probably about six months,
Hmm.
because she needed to go through more treatment. And then she got her kids back, and her son now is 18, and there have been times between that time where we've taken her kids, not actually under safe families, but under this relationship now that we have, where she'll call and say, I just need a break. Can you take my kids? Or one time she had to go in for surgery. We took her kids. And that's really a lovely outcome because she's like extended family to
Right.
us. Like, so when my family gets together, we'll invite her to join, and everybody in my family loves her. And it just creates, and she doesn't have extended family. So it creates this network for a mom who needed that help. We had another mom that was sleeping in a car and had these two and 3 year olds, and it was starting to turn cold and
Mm.
she didn't have any place to stay. And she had one child, and then she was pregnant with the second one. And so she was sleeping in a car, didn't have a place to stay. Again, my wife and I helped, and we ended up deciding in this situation to take the mom and her kids into our home. Our kids had all grown and moved out and things like that. So we had the capacity. And that's great because you could provide the roof, but the mom is still responsible for chasing after her kids. We don't have to do
Right.
it. So, but
Yeah.
it also became an opportunity for us to support the mom and coach her and to really kind of almost not co-parent, but be with her and supporting her. So she was able to get out on her own, and so those are some examples. We have others are really dramatic. The probably for me Probably the most dramatic one for me is we got a call from a hospital in Chicago in Evanston, and they said, we have a little baby that was born without a brain and, with the frontal lobe of the brain. And
Hmm.
so they said the baby is going to die, and the parents kind of abandoned the child at the hospital. And so they said, I know this isn't normally what you do, but we wonder if there might be a family that would be willing to take the child in, almost like hospice, and care for the child until the child dies. And they said, we've been looking for the baby was 6 months, so we've been looking for 6 months, and we can't find anyone in the city that is willing to do that. And so we said, well, it's a little unusual, but we have a vast network. So we put it out in our network, and within a day, we it's kind of upsetting to me, but within a day we had a couple that said, would be more than glad to help this baby.
Mm.
And she ended up being a pediatric nurse at this hospital. And I
Wow.
think her husband was a physician. And so we let the hospital know. We said we have a family that's willing to help. They said, well, can they come in and be trained? And I'm like, I don't know if they need training, but you're welcome to train them.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and they did this, and they took in this baby, and the baby, sure enough, died because they didn't have the neurological capacity to live. It was a beautiful little girl. And they did it it was very sad, but out of a joy to be able to make a difference. And you know what was so cool is that somehow this became known in the hospital,
Mm.
that someone was willing to do this. That at Christmas time, when all the employees get bonuses, for Christmas, some of the social workers who did this, they challenge all employees to donate their Christmas bonus to Safe Families as a way to say thank you.
Wow.
And and certainly not everyone can do that, but it just reflects on me the power and generosity of Americans, of people of faith, of people, your audience, foster parents that are are doing radical and sacrificial things for
Mhm.
really no reward at all, but they're doing it because of their values and why they're called to do this. And many of them have probably raised their own kids and they should be done with parenting and aren't. It just
Right,
reflects
right.
in my mind this incredible capacity and willingness that people are willing to do incredibly radical and sacrificial things for no acknowledgement, no reward, no thank you, but they do it every single day.
Yeah,
And that relationship, that example to me was an extreme, but I think is illustrative of your entire network of people that are doing that same thing every single day. And that's who we are as a society. We're trying to make that more, where my thing is how do we mobilize communities where it's the community decision that the safety of kids and the support of parents is all of our responsibility,
yep,
not
yep.
just the select, gifted foster parents. It's everyone's responsibility. And that's really my mission. So. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk that long, but
No, that's fantastic. And I so appreciate the very beautiful way that you honor the families who do the work of safe families, but also the dignity and inherent value of each child that you guys serve. One final interruption to say thank you to the Jockey Being Family Foundation for underwriting a library of 15 free courses. You can find them at bit.ly/JBF support. That's bit.ly/JBF support. You can take one or all of the courses. They're all designed to strengthen your family, build your parenting skills, and give you tools to handle all the many different things that adoptive, foster, and kinship families encounter when raising children. Thanks so much, and we'll head back to the interview now. What do your volunteers or your safe families say about the experiences after they've been part of it for a while? What do they have to say about it?
some will say I'll never do it again. To be completely honest. And many
Right,
because
right.
foster parents are like, why did I do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
But nearly all of them are really grateful,
Yeah.
because I don't know, it provides an opportunity to serve according to some of our core values we've all learned, right? That we have a responsibility to give back, that we believe in protecting the most vulnerable in our society. And people are thankful to give back. And I think the fact that many of them can maintain long-term relationships with people gives them an added, satisfaction.
Hmm.
Be able to see that you're right, that parent needed help at this particular time, but as we supported them throughout their life, they did a great job in caring for their kids. And my foster son, he's now 40. He has two kids. We didn't adopt him. He didn't really want to be adopted. When he turned old enough, he went down by where his parents were. But he, even at 40, he calls us mom and dad. And he's like, you didn't need to adopt me for me to call you mom and dad.
Mm.
And and it's really a joy, even though he was very, very difficult. He's the one who said, dump dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very difficult. But now it's such a joy to see him 40, raising his own two kids by himself. They're now going to college and stuff. And the joy we have in seeing him succeed in the
Yeah.
way he could succeed. And so those are some of the things that as foster adoptive parents, we need to grab onto, those experiences that we're like, if I wasn't here, who knows what that situation might have been like and stuff. So
Right. So, who would probably be a good fit for one of these roles that you talked about? It's kind of a trick
A
question.
loaded question, right? Well, I think everybody has a role to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody has a role. Even foster parents, can do safe families between kids or whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone has a role to play. And for us, it's part of, like I say, creating the safety net in our communities. And so, yeah, that was a trick question. And thank you for that question, by the way. So,
Ah. So, what hesitations do you hear from families that are kind of getting started? They're in the vetting process or they're in the training process. What are some of the concerns or hesitations you hear from them, and how do you address them?
so I think people don't always say it, but there are unspoken, I don't know, I call it inhibiting emotions. What stands in the way for action, right? And one is fear, right? Who are these people? I don't know them. Might they do harm to me? What do
Hmm.
you mean this mom might call me or whatever? There's this fear. I think the second thing is there is this belief in our society. I call it the professionalization of foster care.
Mm.
That and sometimes it's true that families are so difficult that they need professionals. And that if you're a non-professional, there isn't really room for you.
Hmm.
And I challenge that because as volunteers, we're not here to solve all problems. They might still need a professional, right?
Right.
We're here
Right.
to solve social isolation and loneliness. And the fact you're doing that's our niche, is that's what we're solving. And anyone can do that.
Right.
So the fear is, another fear is I don't want to do this alone. And so that's why we build these networks around people. Sometimes people just have lost capacity for not empathy or compassion,
Mm.
but just like they hear so many of the family difficulties, they're like, oh, there we go again. And they become callous and are not active and willing to respond. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and they're realistic things. And if we could talk about it, then it's really great.
Yeah.
We think there are facilitating emotions like hope, right? I think is a facilitating emotion. The idea that you can make a difference. You don't need, a PhD or an MA or whatever, that you can make a difference. Whatever you have, your experience, whatever, raising your kids or living life, you can make a difference with that alone. Are, some of the things that we use to counter those.
So, hearing all of this, if one of our listeners, and hopefully more than one of our listeners, is interested in serving this community, what's their first step?
Well, I would just go to our website at safe-families.org and just to look at it, check it out. And then it kind of describes the roles, and it even says things like, hey, if this isn't in your community and you want to bring it there, great. We would love to work with you to bring it to your community. So that would be, I think, the first step. And I'm a person of faith, and so I often pray about things and seek the Lord because we're all super busy, right? We're all have challenges in our life. And then just thinking about how do I want to step my foot in the water, and maybe not jump in with, well, your group could do this because they've fostered, right? Just they could jump in and say, I'll take a 18-year-old for 3 months, or something like that. I'm kidding about that, but yeah, but just to step in and give it a little taste. So.
That's awesome. And we'll link the organization in our show notes for listeners who are maybe feeling a little twinge, like this might be something they could try. So, for a parent or a caregiver who is just feeling underwater, overwhelmed, like they just don't have the resources or the support or the break that they need, what encouragement would you offer to them to get involved with the Safe Families program?
Well, I would say you're doing a great thing, and we would love to help you. And whether it's a grandparent raising grandkids, or someone taking care of their daughter's children, or even just foster care, we need help. We all need. I do. I need help, and I know when there are people around asking me how you doing or can I take your kid. We want to be a support to you because we think keeping kids safe and in healthy environments for them to flourish is so important. And I know that's what you're about, and particularly even adoptive kids, that people have made choices and they realize, that as they've gone, that, kids end up showing other behaviors and makes things difficult, and people need support in that and hanging in there with that. So, and we want to be part of that.
Well, Dr. David Anderson, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your passion and your investment in supporting and serving families who just need a little help along the way. And we all need a little help along the way. So I'm so grateful that an organization like yours is taking on this specific niche and really going after helping heal social isolation in America and across the world.
I'm honored you chose me, and thank you for having me. This was very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.